on the webinar. So good afternoon and welcome. You've got a bit of an advantage on me to start with because you can see me and I can't see you. So I'm assuming there's lots of people out there. I'm Dave Tompkinson from a company called the AND Partnership, and we're running the iManage program for all line managers. So many of you, I'm guessing, will have met me, but welcome to those of you that haven't. So today's webinar is on preparing for our WeTalk conversations. Where we're up to in the iManage program is we're between workshop 2 and 3, and therefore this is kind of helping you to think about the preparation needed for the conversations before the workshop 3, which will look at how the conversations can be structured and also how to actually get yourself into the right frame of mind for those. So this is all about the preparation for them. I'll explain a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about in a second. Okay, so so in terms of the session itself, it's going to be about 45 minutes. We're going to lead the content. Feel free to interact with chat throughout the webinar. So anything you want to ask us or anybody else in the group, please just put it in the chat. Lee's going to keep his eye on that, and Verity as well. Can you please keep your microphones off just to minimize distractions? That would be really helpful. And the slides and a recording will be available on the iManage Teams channel afterwards. Okay. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at the different types of WeTalk conversation that there are. And you may well have had some briefing notes on this already, and there's quite a lot of information on the intranet, but we'll cover all of that as we go through. We'll have a look at creating a shared purpose for the meetings, how to prepare effectively for those conversations, and also the two-way feedback, giving and receiving. So just a bit of a reminder about how to give and receive great feedback to get the best results. Okay, so welcome to those people who are just joining us, but we're only just starting now, so we're just getting into the different types of WeTalk meetings that we can have. Now, the 3 meetings have been defined as catch-up, one-to-one, or more than the day job. So just to explain a bit about each one, just so people are aware of why you might organise one of these 3 meetings. So the catch-up is fairly self-explanatory, and that would just be a typical immediate meeting, probably spontaneous, and likely to have a specific purpose. It might be to check in with the person to see how they're doing, or it might be on a specific task or project or development need. And it would just be a simple catch-up meeting. A one-to-one meeting, it tends to be more regular and planned. The leader, in conjunction with their team member, decides the appropriate frequency, but it's likely to be around about monthly. But leaders can make it more or less frequent if appropriate. And then the more than the day job meeting, it tends to be one that is future focused and developmental, and the only guidance on the timing for that is at least annually. You can do them more frequently than that, but have them at least annually is the guidelines. So those are the 3 different types of meetings. So when we're talking about preparing for these meetings, there will be different prep needed for different types of meetings, obviously. But we'll try and make sure we sort of touch on all of these as we go through. Okay, so in terms of preparing then, what we've got here is just a sort of a simple model to try and explain the sorts of areas that you might need to think about when you're preparing for a conversation with your team members. Now, right in the center and up front is the shared purpose, and that's really the critical thing to start with. So thinking about, why are we having this meeting? What's the purpose? What's the outcome that we want to get from it? And that might be generated by you as the leader, it might be generated by your team member, or it might be agreed by both of you, which hopefully will happen anyway. But one or both of you might actually prompt the meeting. So agreeing the shared purpose is really key. And then the green on the left is the being side, the blue on the right is the doing side. So the stuff you need to do to prepare, and the stuff you need to think about how you want to be as a leader when you're actually preparing. So in the being side, there's preparing your mindset and choosing your style. you're going to use, and that will obviously depend on the type of meeting and what you need to get from it. And then on the right hand side, the physical preparation for the conversation, and also the gathering of any facts or data or evidence that you need to do to help the conversation go well. Okay, so those are the 5 areas we're going to look briefly at in the webinar as we go through. So firstly then, the shared purpose. And this is all about what will we talk about during the conversation. So the things that you may well want to talk about, depending on on the type of meeting that you're having. The first one is a shared understanding of performance. Now, one way or another, I'm guessing that most meetings will include a version of this, and some of them will be more formal than others, but actually getting that understanding of how the team member believes they're performing, and also sharing how you believe they're performing, will be a key part of particularly the one-to-one and the more than the day job meetings. And then there's 4 other areas that have been identified that you might want to include in your conversations at any given time. The first one is about their well-being. So thinking about how they're doing, do they need any support? How's their mental health holding up? So really getting under the skin of how their well-being is going. Also, you might want to talk to them about their development and how that's going. You might want to give them some recognition either from yourself or from others, and also to get some feedback from them about how you're doing as a line manager. Are you helping them? Are you hindering them? Are you actually enabling them to be at their best? And then finally, you might want to have a discussion with them about how they're contributing to the team. So just make sure that both parties know what we're talking about before you have the meeting. And there's a WeTalk toolkit on the intranet. Make sure you use that when you're preparing. There's lots of really useful tips and guidance on there to help with the preparation. So before you start anything, really get clear on what your purpose is and what are we going to talk about during that conversation. Okay, so that's the first part of the prep. The second part of the prep is playing to win versus playing to avoid losing. It's getting your mindset in the right space. Now, these 2 phrases, playing to win, playing to avoid losing, really get different results. They're not really kind of just as simple as positive and negative, but they do get different results when you're trying to engage people and you're trying to get people to think about what they might want to do differently going forward. So it's really useful to be in that playing to win mindset. So if I just describe both states to you and give you a couple of examples, a playing to win mindset is one where you're thinking, how good could we make this? How good could this be? In playing to avoid losing, you're thinking about, how do I stop this going bad? How do I avoid losing or avoiding conflict? So the playing to win is a much more expansive state, whereas playing to avoid losing is very constricted. And there's lots of sporting analogies for this, because clearly the kind of winning and losing part tends to play into the sport, but it also plays into business. If you think about any sport that you like, you can usually tell when somebody, either an individual or a team, are in a playing to win mindset. They somehow are just at their best and they are just kind of buzzing. They're just really going for it. They're really kind of making it happen. In the playing to avoid losing, they tend to be more playing it safe, not taking risks. And very often then, as a result of that, they sometimes then do lose. As an Aston Villa fan, I can really relate to that. But there's a story that I really like, which kind of highlights this. And one of our associates told this story in terms of, he said, you know, I always used to be that sort of person that was doing my emails in the evening. And he said, I'd be in my office doing my emails, and my 8-year-old son would come into the office and say, Dad, will you read me a story? And I'd say, what now? And he said, well, you did promise, Dad. And I used to close my laptop and march him upstairs, plonk him in bed, open the book, read the story as quickly as I could, missing out some pages if I could get away with it, slam the book shut, right, come on, light out now, and then go downstairs, open the laptop and carry on working. And this associate said, that was when I was in my playing to avoid losing space. And then moving into that playing to win space, same scenario, still doing emails and being asked to read a story. But as I went up the stairs with my son, I used to think to myself, how would the best dad in the world read this story? And of course, the best dad in the world would put all the voices on, they'd make it exciting, they'd have a bit of fun, they'd sort of make it kind of exciting at the ending, and then they'd switch the light off, come downstairs, carry on working. And the point he was making out of all of that was that essentially it takes no more time to be in playing to win than playing to avoid losing, but it makes a huge difference to the people that you're talking to. Okay, so just worth thinking about which mode are you in more of the time, playing to win or playing to avoid losing, and which mode are your team members in? Worth kind of thinking. And for best dad, you can substitute best leader, you can substitute best team member, best sibling, friend. You can use that story for a multitude of sins. Just in case any of you who've just joined missed the beginning, if you could put your microphones on mute for us, that would be really helpful. Okay, so what else does playing to win look like then? Here's a list of the sort of behaviours that you might see with preparing your mindset, playing to win versus playing to avoid losing. So in the playing to avoid losing space, you might see people who are risk averse, defensive, blaming others, doing just enough, low energy, that won't work. So I'm sure you can think about some people in your teams that do often stray into this mode, keeping your head down, being critical, seeing the negatives, just surviving. And these people are sometimes called mood hoovers. And these are the people that tend to suck the life out of things. If you're suggesting a new idea, they might say, oh, we did that in 1963. And it's that sort of feeling of puncturing a balloon and the air just leaking out of it. So that's the effect of playing to avoid losing. In playing to win, you tend to take calculated risks. You look for the positives. You learn from mistakes. You go the extra mile. High energy, buzz. How could we make it work? Focused on the team and others. Daring to dream big goals, building on strengths. And people tend to volunteer for things when they're in playing to win. They tend to be at their best self. So by you being in your playing to win mindset, you're far more likely to help your team members be in their playing to win mindset. And it's not just about rah-rah or positive thinking, although that is an element of it, but it can be high energy or low energy in both modes. So, you know, a high energy playing to avoid losing might be quite angry or aggressive, and a low energy playing to win might just be peaceful, reflective, seeing the big picture. So it's not just about the obvious ones in terms of energies. And so really, for as far as your conversations go for WeTalk, it's about thinking about how do I get myself into that playing to win mindset before I go into the conversation, so that I'm really trying to get the best from that conversation. Okay, so there's loads more I could talk about with that, but I'm just conscious of time, so we'll move it on. But that playing to win mindset is a really key part of preparing that sort of mindset before you go into the conversations. The other really key part is thinking about your type of mindset that you're going into the conversation with, and that's about, are you going in with a growth mindset or are you going in with a fixed mindset? And again, it's a kind of spin-off from playing to win, playing to avoid losing, but it has got some differences. And you can see in here that the sort of growth mindset has, people tend to think that failure is an opportunity to grow. I can learn to do anything I want. Challenges help me to grow. My effort and attitude determine my abilities. I like to try new things, inspired by the success of others. Whereas the fixed mindset is failure is the limit of my abilities. I'm either good at it or I'm not. I can either do it or I can't. My potential is predetermined. Yeah, and feedback and criticism are taken more personally. So again, as the person at the leader end of the conversation, going in there with a growth mindset is far more powerful to get people engaged and motivated than it is going in with a fixed mindset. So thinking about your mindset when you go in there, are you thinking this person has got more potential than they're using, or are you going in there thinking this person's reached their level, they can't do any more? Because kind of whatever you think is true probably will come true is part of the research around this. If you think somebody has got limited abilities, then they probably will have those limited abilities. So it's about that. How can I get the best out of people? And research varies, but the latest research that I've seen says that we use about 15 to 20% of our potential as humans. So that is a phenomenally low statistic. And if we could just use 5% more and get people to release 5% more of that potential, how much better could we be as an organization? How much happier could they be as individuals? So what we'd like you to do in the chat now, if you would, is just to think about a leader who's developed you the most over the years. So think about a leader either in current organization, or if you've worked outside of staffs, then in previous organizations, but a leader who's grown you the most over the years. Just try and focus on one leader. What was their behavior or attitude towards you that made the difference? So in other words, how were they being? And what did they physically do that helped to develop you? And just pop your answers in the chat if you would for us. So what was their behavior or attitude towards you that made the difference? How were they being? And what did they physically do that helped to develop you? And then I'll ask Lee, my colleague, to come in and just tell us some of the things as they come through in the chat.
Thanks, Dave. I am here. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. We've got lots coming through on the chat, which is great. So, somebody that believed in them, inclusive, supportive, interested in their own ideas, respected me, supported me. Again, we've got listening, which I think is a really key one, and supportive. Recognition, gave recognition. Is one that's come through as well. Someone that were genuine and authentic. Behaved with a high degree of personal integrity, agreeing a development plan as well. Being made to feel empowered is coming through there as well. Gave me the support which led to the confidence as well. So an increase in confidence, more responsibility. So giving someone more responsibility, that empowerment there. Someone that was positive. Again, we've got supportive really coming through, but also trust. Being able to build that trust, and I guess that goes two ways in terms of trusting that leader and the leader trusting you to be able to do that job. Again, being positive, leading by example, I think is a really good one as well. Non-judgmental, always listen with both ears is one that we've got, and absolutely, so that real active listening, which is sometimes taken for granted, I think.
Yeah.
Making the time for me. So somebody appearing to have that time and, living in this busy world that we are, I think that's really important. Minimizing the distractions, I think, and certainly making some time. Clear goals and expectations. So that clarity being really, really key. Letting me have responsibility for workloads. We've got another one on constructive when things go wrong. I think we'll come to that a little bit later in the webinar in terms of feedback and that. Lots of pressure come through as well. So I think people react really well to pressure. I think it can be a bad thing when it becomes that sort of distress or burnout. But I think actually having the pressure can actually impact performance positively as well as somebody's put on it. So yeah, lots and lots of things coming through, Dave.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. Thanks, Lee. So that you can see from those lots of similarities, lots of common ground in terms of what leaders have done to develop you all. And the fact is that we know, because it's happened to us, we know what the best behaviors are to develop us. So what we need to do is just think about how would we like to be developed, and then bring that into our conversations with our team. So how can I apply some of those things that have grown me the most in the conversations that we have with our team members? So it's quite a good activity to write all those down, the ones that you've put in the chat, just for your own benefit, to say, this is what leaders who develop people look like. how do I get to be more like that more of the time? Because it's very easy in our busy worlds to forget some of the things that people have done to really help us along the way. And I always say, you know, when your team get to be leaders, or some of your team get to be leaders, and they start being asked this sort of question on workshops, think of a leader who's developed you most. Do you want to be that leader that they're actually talking about? If so, how do you need to be to actually create that? Okay, so that's the second part of preparing your mindset. Now, the next bit is number 2, choosing your style. And some of you might have seen this before, so it might be a refresher, but we'll just give you a quick look at some of the things you need to think about when you're choosing the style that you work with. And this concept of parent, adult, child, these are particular ego states that we can choose to take on board. And they come from a lot of places. It can sometimes come from our history, our past, or it can come from how we've been managed in the past. But a parent style tends to be nurturing or protective, or it can be controlling, critical, or aggressive, depending on how it's played out. The child style tends to be rebellious and playful, or it can be adaptive and submissive. And then you've got the adult style in the center, which tend to focus on equal relationships and tend to be more self-aware and more assertive rather than aggressive. So giving both people's rights airtime rather than thinking in the parent side, my rights are more important. And in the child's is giving the rights away. Anybody that's done anything on this as a topic. So it's being aware when we take up a stance or a style with our team, how can we get into that adult to adult relationship rather than parent child, which is quite easy to slip into sometimes. And it's that sort of, if we're trying to do it with the best of intentions, sometimes we can be looking after people in that nurturing way, but it still takes away some of the power and pushes people back into child mode if we're not very careful. And what each of them looks like when you're doing it is that you tend to have this kind of, when it's a parent-child interaction on the left, then it just feels a bit like, do you know that sort of feeling when you used to go and see a teacher or a headmaster, or you'd be being spoken to critically by your parent, and it drives you into that sort of either quiet submissive behavior, or it can drive you into that sort of rebellious pushback behavior. So it's not as good a style if you take that parent child, because you're the one holding the responsibility and they're not taking very much at all. Equally on the right, you've got parent parent, which tends to be a bit like two stags locking horns, or child child, which is bags of fun, but not much gets done. So it tends to be very sort of, sort of humorous, light-hearted banter, but you don't actually really get to the heart of what really needs to happen. So we're looking for these adult interactions, the 50-50 relationship, where both parties are taking a part in agreeing how the meeting's going to run, in actually making the meeting work, and indeed making the actions work coming out the other side. So again, just have a think about which style do you deploy? Which style do you have deployed maybe by your leader, and are you copying your leader, or have you got a style which is different to your leader? And if you're not sure which style you use, maybe think about talking to your team about this. How do we get to be adult? When do they feel in child mode? When do they feel that sort of being either protected or being criticized? So just a real sort of prompt to think about getting yourself into adult rather than parent child mode. Okay, so that's the first thing about choosing your style. The second thing is just a reminder. Hopefully most of you on the call are on the iManage program and will recognize some of these models. But thinking about these sorts of things before you go into a conversation can be really crucial. So which energies are you using? Physical, intellectual, emotional, or spirit? Which energies is your team member likely to be using? So you can try and match their energies. Then from the coaching side, how much responsibility and ownership can you ask this person to take? How do you push that down and use that sort of coaching style, if you can, to actually get them to take responsibility for their own performance and for achieving what you need them to do. And then finally, the shadow I cast. So are you aware of the impact, the unintended impact you can have on people? So that impact felt versus impact intended. If you're not aware of it, how do you get feedback of that so that you can be the best you can be in these conversations? Okay, so hopefully that's on the being side. This is about thinking about your mindset, thinking about your style. Okay, and those that say all these slides will be available afterwards. What Lee's going to do now is take you through this being section on the right hand side of the model.
Thank you, Dave. Hopefully everybody can still hear me. I don't want the sort of classic "you're on mute," but yeah, I've got a thumbs up, so we're all systems go. Very quick introduction. Yeah, Lee Morris, with alongside Dave, work for ANS Partnership, and I'm delivering several of the groups on the I Manage program, which is fantastic. So yeah, thanks, Dave. Dave covered the being side of the model. I think it's really, they're all equal, really. I think there's an importance to all five actually on the model. But what I'd like to focus on for the sort of last part of the webinar is the doing elements, and then moving on to feedback, both giving feedback, but also, again, equally important, receiving feedback as a leader. I think that's a really key part of the WeTalk conversations. So as you can see there, they're split into sort of two key elements, the doing side of things. You've got preparing for the conversation, which is the slide that's up now, and then you've got gathering evidence and facts, etc. So just looking down the list of items on this slide, you've got things like agreeing the frequency of meetings, who will put in the meetings, and what to cover. And I think that's an important part. And I think it's important, and it goes a little bit back to Dave's point when he talked about transactional analysis, and he talked about the parent, adult, and child conversations, because what you don't want to do is sort of, as a leader, act as the parent and the colleague as the child, and sort of say, you know, we're agreeing it for it's got to be monthly. I'm going to put the meetings in. This is what we're going to cover. Because what you don't want to do is make the employee, the colleague, feel as though they're just being talked at. So I think it's really important that you're actually, it feels like the conversation is being driven by the colleague, or at least equal, if you like. So I think that's a really important part. Agreeing the topics so you can both prepare. And again, you know, it's okay for you as the leader to prepare, but actually you also want to the colleague to prepare as well. And I think this goes, again, it goes back to empowerment, really. So, you know, one of the key behavioural values at staffs is empowerment, along with ambitious and courageous. And this is going to lead to greater empowerment. And they're going to be much more invested in the conversations if they feel empowered to prepare for them, to arrange them, etc. So agreeing those topics, I think, is really important. Where to hold the meetings. And again, this can be really difficult at the moment. We know that a lot of people are working remotely from home, not everybody, but we've still got to hold the meetings. We still need to have the conversations. So it's kind of considering, you know, if it is over Teams, making sure that there's no distractions. Is it on neutral grounds? And think about privacy as well, both for you as the leader, but also as the colleague as well. You know, people might be being homeschooled. There might be many distractions around people working from home. So it's about agreeing that, and you know, it's both parties to do that. If you are working remotely, you really want to replicate that face-to-face conversation. So some people will feel a lot more comfortable if they have that conversation face-to-face. But we now know that we've got to kind of do a bit of a hybrid role, if you like, of both face-to-face and virtual. So we've got to be comfortable with having conversations over Teams as well. So how do you replicate that? Agree what will happen if either of you or both can't make the meeting. And I think that's an important one as well, because there's nothing worse from both a colleague and a leader's point of view in, you know, cancellations and then not being arranged and then nothing really happens. So, you know, that can be really, really negative. So try and agree a process on what will happen next. Who's going to arrange the meeting if it is postponed? Another part of this is agreeing whether to take notes and in what format. And I think that's an important one. Not every conversation, WeTalk conversation, will need to have notes. And I think this definitely needs to be agreed between the two parties before that. If it is agreed, then who's going to take the notes? What format do they want to be in? How are they going to be emailed out, communicated, etc. I think it's a really important part of getting the preparation right. And one that I think is a really important one as well is how will you start the conversation? Now, you're not always going to have that opportunity to do lots of preparation when it comes to conversations, because actually some of it, you want to be in the moment. You want it to be nipping it in the bud, if you like. But actually, you know, if you can prepare, maybe write down a few lines, a few sentences on how you want to start that conversation. And I think that can really help. That can it can sort of help with your confidence and really put you into, going back to Dave's points on sort of getting your attitude right in terms of the mindset and playing to win. That can really help with that if you've prepared correctly. Okay, and then moving on to the next slide. So this is the second component of the doing elements. So this is about gathering evidence, facts, and data. Really important when you're having conversations, and you know the evidence must be factual. You might want to write down any questions you may want to ask as well. So as well as sort of writing down maybe how you might start that conversation, you might also want to write down any questions you might want to ask. And there's some brilliant examples actually in the WeTalk toolkit. I know Dave referenced that earlier, which is on the intranet. It is well worth having a look at that, because there's some great coaching questions on things like well-being, development, feedback and recognition, and team contribution. And yeah, you know, it's situational, but actually asking coaching questions that really get people to think for themselves and come up with their own answers, I think is really important. And again, goes back to that ownership model that Dave covered a little bit earlier. So the other side of things is you might want to gather feedback from others before you actually have that conversation. Now, an important one for me is that you shouldn't then say, you know, the responsibility is gone and it's all about, you know, Jimmy said this and Frankie said that. And, you know, it's actually got to come from you. You've got to take responsibility for that feedback. But there's no reason why you can't gather feedback from other people who might well have worked with that person a lot more than you have done. Make sure that when you are gathering the feedback, that it's factual. It's accurate, and it's not ambiguous. There's nothing worse than feedback that's really, really grey. It's woolly, and that's, you know, not great for people. You know, they're not really going to understand what that feedback is and then take ownership for it if it's not clear. And clarity, I think, is a really important part of evidence and feedback. And then the final point on there is around considering whether to include an action planner. So again, you've got a useful document there, which is, again, is available on the intranet, which is your action planner. I guess it does what it says in the tin. It's very, very much if you do feel that as part of the WeTalk conversation, it will be useful, helpful to set up an action plan, then this can be a really useful document and a tool that can help you co-create. And again, remember, it's about co-creating that action plan, not the leader just setting that action plan and that's it, set in stone. You want it to be two-way. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So this is just an overview, really, of what we've covered during the first part of the webinar. So we go back to Dave's very first point around both parties having that shared purpose, being aware of that, being able to buy into that shared purpose of the conversation. Then we move on to the being. How should you be? when you're preparing for a WeTalk conversation. So it's about preparing your mindset. So things like that playing to win against playing to avoid losing mindset, and also the growth against the fixed mindset being really important as well. And then there's choosing your style. So that's where the parent, adult and child sort of transactional analysis model works really well. And anybody who wants to find out a little bit more around that, that's Eric Byrne that devised that model. Some really useful things that are available on online there. And as Dave said, there's also some of the models that we've covered during the program as well. The I Manage program. So things like using different energies for different situations and with different people. Having coaching conversations to increase ownership being really key, and thinking about the impact that you're having, the shadow eye cast. And then moving on to the preparation for the conversation, making sure that it's two-way, to make sure that the colleague feels just as empowered as you do, thinking about the time, the environment, and what's going to be covered during the conversation, and then gathering that evidence, the facts, the data. Some of it's going to be easier than others. Some of it's going to be tangible stuff, and some might be less tangible, things like behaviour, culture change, team contribution, etc. So that's an overview. And now I just want to move on to providing feedback. Now, for some of you that have been through the I Manage program, particularly module 2, we spend quite a bit of time on how you should provide feedback. So there's lots of different ways to provide feedback effectively. And what we're going to do is just share some bullets now. So they'll keep them coming on the bullets on the slide. Absolutely being professional when you're giving that feedback, I think, is really, really key. Talking in person if you can, but you may well need to talk on Teams. Addressing it as soon as possible. Really key part is nipping it in the bud, really, that in the moment feedback, because if you let it go away and drag on, then it kind of dilutes the impact of the feedback. So addressing it as soon as you can. Facts, not feelings. You may well have really strong feelings and emotions around the giving feedback, but you've got to emphasize the facts. Really be careful about the language as well that you're using. You know, there's some real negative language. There can be sugarcoating things. There can be providing wishy-washy language as well, that really kind of masks things. Be solutions orientated. There's a reason why you're giving feedback, and there's a goal there. And actually, you know, help that person with some solutions as well. And try and make it a two-way conversation. We've got empty their glass first, which we'll cover in a minute. But making it a two-way conversation, once you've given the feedback, then you can move into that two-way conversation and give positive feedback too. But what we don't want you to do is sort of hide it behind developmental feedback, so sort of masking things. And I think if you're balancing things, where if something, you know, you're giving some positive feedback because somebody's done really well on a project, or they've you know, been brilliant as a team player, then do it. Just give that feedback in the moment, but also, you know, give developmental feedback when you need to, whether it's behaviour or performance, and make it part of the culture. This sort of two-way feedback. Okay, there are different models, and again, we cover some of the models on the I Manage program. So there's a real classic model which we really like, which you can see on the screen. And remember, you will get a copy of the slides, but that's about asking the colleague first. So ask them questions around what went well, what went tricky, what was tricky, and what would you do differently next time. So you're actually giving them a chance to almost empty the glass, if you like. And that's where the glass sort of comes in. And then you can ask them, well, would you like some feedback from me? You know, and again, you just repeat what I thought was good, what I thought was tricky, what I thought you might do differently next time. And that's a really useful way, because actually there's a little bit of empowerment for them to give their own feedback. And actually, quite often you might get people being very, very honest, overly honest with their own feedback as well. Other models, there's some brilliant behaviour models as well. So some of you might have heard of SBI, which is talking about the situation and then what the behaviour was and the impact on others. It might be impact on you, on the team, on external stakeholders, whatever that might be. And I had one actually on one of the programs that I deliver for Staffordshire. So thanks for the leader who gave me BIF. And BIF is another behavioural one, which is, again, the behaviour, talking through the behaviour, the impact on the behaviour, and how that made people feel, or could be making people feel. And then there's the sort of future. So what do we want to do next? What do we want to change in terms of that behaviour? And then another one, which I use actually as a really good action planning one when I've given feedback, is the traffic light model. So this is about stop, start, continue. This is what I want you to stop doing, start doing, and continue doing. So feel free to use any of those. You may have some more. You might not even want to use a feedback model, but they can be handy. So the final part that I wanted to look at was how you receive feedback, because two-way feedback is crucial here when we're having the WeTalk conversations, and it might not always be easy to actually receive feedback. So, as we've got on the slide there, listen to the feedback, really listen, don't interrupt, hear that person out, avoid distractions and sort of listen to understand. Be aware of your body language, your tone of voice when you're actually giving responses. Try and be open and positive and really understand that message. You might want to ask questions to develop it because you really want to understand it. And then, take the time to thank them for the feedback as well. And then that's up to you to sort of reflect and decide on what you want to do next with that feedback. What's assess the value of it. What's the consequences of using that feedback or actually ignoring the feedback? And then another important one is following up. So there's many ways to follow up. It might be, arrange another meeting. It might be just going on and doing it, whatever that feedback is. It might be a quick email. It might be, you might want to focus even on it on team meetings. So having that follow-up, I think, is a key part of receiving feedback as well. So we are coming to the end. We've got around about a minute left of the webinar, and what we wanted to do was make sure that this is just the start, if you like. So this is a 45-minute webinar, but we wanted you to be able to access the resources to find out a little bit more. So there is a WeTalk section on the intranet. So if you've not checked that out already, please do so. Remember that there's going to be a recording of this webinar with the slides in Go, but there's also the brilliant toolkit. There's the WeTalk briefing, which some of you might have seen. As I said earlier, there's the optional action planner, and there's also an e-learning module that you can choose to complete as an option if you wanted to develop and learn a little bit more. If you've not already done so, and I hope many people have now, please sign up for the iManage program as well, and you'll learn lots more around this and many other things around having effective WeTalk conversations. And of course, if you've got any other queries, you need some help or advice, don't hesitate to contact the L&D team, who will definitely be up for having a conversation to give you some more help and advice. Now, Verity, I'm hoping, will be putting a link to the feedback. We really appreciate it. There you go. Very good. Thanks, Verity. In terms of giving us feedback on this short 45-minute webinar, we really value that feedback. So if you can take the time to do that, that would be brilliant.
Lee, can I just while they're doing that, just so everybody knows, there is a second webinar on Thursday, which is designed for your colleagues, for the team members, as opposed to team leaders. So if you've got some of your team who don't know about it and would like to sign up, there are spaces still available. So do get them to sign up.
Thanks, Dave. And we are now at 1:45. Thanks for everybody for attending this session. Hope you found it useful, valuable, and interesting. Dave and I hope to see people shortly on the programme. And maybe reconnect with those that we've already seen. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks guys, see you later.